What's up, everybody? My movie Left It Wall is out now, and we got some screenings coming up in 2024. February 22nd, Tucson, Arizona. February 29th, Omaha, Nebraska. March 20th, Washington, D.C., and that is a free screening. So Washington, D.C., be sure to check out the movie. And March 22nd, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, we're doing a stand-up show, a screening, and a Q&A after, so I will physically be present at that one. Get tickets now at robplacone.com. I'll also be announcing more 2024 tour dates with both screenings, shows, screenings and shows. You get the idea. But for now, Tucson, Omaha, Washington, D.C., Pittsburgh. You can get tickets right now at romplacone.com. See you in 2024. Episode 12. Andy Iwancio. Andy Iwancio is a comedian, creative, and DJ. She's taken those niches and woven a beautiful creative quilt for herself. Her debut full-length, Better Living Through Feministry, comes out this Friday, December 8th, 2023, on Kill Rock Stars. Andy and I started comedy together in Seattle, and she was one of the first friends I made in the scene. We lived near each other, so often we would take the same bus. Plus, she grew up in Baltimore, I grew up in Pittsburgh, so we had that part of the country in common, too. When I think back to those early days in Seattle, I remember how fun and carefree they were, and Andy's among the first people I think of. We were all just broke 20-somethings with a notebook in our pocket and a head full of dreams, which, despite its hardships, is a beautiful thing. Please welcome to the show, Andy Iwancio. All right, Andy, how are you? Thanks for joining me.
I'm doing all right. I had a seizure earlier today, but I'm doing okay. It just bumped my face. So
yeah,
if it looks like I'm glistening, that if it looks like I'm slowly turning into a glazed ham, that's what that's about. But
it could pass for a sunburn.
Yeah, let's say that again. I look like I have tropical sunburn money.
There you go. And for the audio podcast listeners, it's nothing whatsoever. They don't see a thing.
No. For the audio podcasters listening, I look like the sweaty elbow of a football player.
Nice. So first, congrats on everything, and we're of course going to be diving into it. But we'll start earlier. So we both started comedy pretty much around the same time. Had a lot of fun memories, and especially since you and I would kind of travel together a lot because we both took the bus and we both lived in the same neighborhood. And or similar neighborhoods. I think technically I was Fremont. I was considered Fremont, even though I was like right on the cusp, and you were Wallingford at the time. But same thing. And as I've gotten older, a lot of people say, those first couple years are the most fun, and I don't like to think in those terms, but I feel like those first couple years were kind of the most fancy free and just chill and just doing it for the fun of it. Would you agree with that? Like, what's your take on all that?
I think it's like it's the time in which you're like, when you're youngest in comedy, nobody has any of these huge aspirations. And even though it doesn't seem like it was a long time ago, it was like 2007. Even though that's not a long time ago, like the leaps and bounds comedy has made as we've moved into podcasts and everything, and like everybody's windows have opened in terms of opportunity. Like, it seems so charming how simple it was back then. But at the same time, I think I would have stayed in it longer if there were more options. I think it was still like a finite amount of space acting as a meritocracy to a certain extent, when it really was like it was still, driven by as much opinion and backstage stuff as anything else I'd been involved to in the creative arts up till that point. But yeah, just going up and trying shit and not caring if it works and coming back the next week and trying something new in that like open micer, I'm not going to repeat anything kind of way. uh, yeah, I think it was fancy for you in that regard for sure. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask. So, did you step away for a little while, or because I know you were still doing it when I left Seattle, and then I kind of wasn't able to keep tabs on everybody. So, did you step away from comedy for a while?
Yeah, I took a break of about I think 3.5 years because wasn't out as transgender, and I didn't think it was going to affect anything really big, but it was taking a lot of my when people talk about coming out as queer or transgender, there's like a especially as starting comedy before coming out, you act like it's really that your brain's taking up an amount of space, like you're not using your full capacity because part of your brain is keeping this thing locked in and away from your actual feelings. And so when you come out, you're immensely a nicer person and a better creative in general. And I didn't stop writing. I just went to writing on Twitter for years. And so I stayed writing, but I wasn't getting on stage during those years.
So, when did you know you were transgender? Like is it something you just always felt like you knew, or was there some time where you didn't know what it was, or talk about that process?
I've known since I was a kid. I mean, my parents kind of knew too. There's a picture of me at I don't know, 7 years old with a Fisher Price tea set for Christmas. And while that doesn't necessarily mean it's gendered, it was clear that I knew something about myself from an early age. And it wasn't until high school, I'd say 94, 95, that I was really starting to address it with friends and in small, closeted areas of my life. And, as time went on, I knew it and I had it in the background, and even my partner knew it, but I wasn't out about it. At that time, I still used the word crossdresser, which is not correct a term.
Sure.
I thought I don't try to explain that. That's such an outdated term and feels weird to even say now, but yeah, that's just kind of the push and pull about you're trying to say you're only fascinated by part of it or not fascinated, but that tug of war and all that space that's going on in your head is taking up so much of your time in your emotions that trying to hold on to do something comedy was really hard.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the term crossdresser, which, yeah, I can't remember the last time I even heard that term until right now. But I think that there are some people out there that they just like performing in drag, and that's it. And clearly that's not the same thing. Or
no, I at a time, if you can imagine that, I think it was that crossdresser, transvestite, and transgender were all considered different things back then. Mm-hmm. Mostly the crossdresser was somebody who wanted to wear women's clothing, but not necessarily to the point of any reason other than they felt like it. Transvestite was somebody who's attracted to the idea of wearing women's clothing, and then transgender was just somebody who's trans saw themselves as a woman, and it was just if you can imagine, it's a spectrum of living full-time to living part-time in terms of what you do. But I don't, and I think it's obvious when you see pictures of crossdressers back then that it wasn't ever really a sexual thing per se, because you see somebody dressed up as a librarian. You see somebody dressed up as like who looks like just a 50-year-old English teacher with a not the like bombast of any sort of sexualized feelings, you know. Yeah, and it was a long term of digging out and slowly coming out to people over the years.
What year was it when you completely came out?
Like 2010, 2011, I think.
Okay.
And then like I think wide open maybe 2012.
So I remember, and I don't know if you remember this, but I asked you this because, you know, I try to always learn and be a good ally. And there's a transgender person who we both know, and they were talking to me once many years ago, and they said to me that they were going to see their father. And I said, oh, okay, that's exciting. And then they said, and he's going to meet me for the first time. And I said, oh, that, and I took that literally. And I said, oh, so you've never met your father? And then they said, no, I've met him many times, but he's never met me. And I said, oh, okay. And so when I saw you for the first time when you were out, I said, hey, can I ask you a question? And it might be a really stupid question. And if it is, I feel like we've been friends long enough. And so I asked you, I said, are we meeting for the first time? And you looked at me and you said, no. And you were like, why did you ask me that question? And I explained why. You said, yeah, that's not, I mean, I guess that's a thing for some people, but that's not how I see it. Is that sort of how it goes?
I think that when somebody finds it later in life, it's it's a possibility that is how they feel and express their emotions. That's just like in the same way that some people, especially transgender people, put up like a before and an after pic of them before they transitioned on hormones to after. And I don't believe I personally just knew I was always this person, you know, ever since I was a kid. I don't see it as a before and after, but more of a journey. But if somebody's drastically been living at distance from their like parent and aren't out to them and are suddenly going by a new name and are suddenly going home to like splash it across the page to some conservative family member, I can totally see that as meeting you for the first time. But I think that's more of like a something you'd hear in a movie. Okay. But you know, different people describe it or find themselves in different places about how they come out. So it's entirely just related to how that person feels. But I've known for so long that even meeting trans comics now, they deal with different things than I dealt with when I was growing up. So like they have the internet, they have like, you can order breast forms online. Like you can like find like all of these things to try out gender in a certain way. But I knew in like 95 and I didn't really have a community to find. And I had to craft my own boobs. Like, cause you like, as a trans woman, an older trans woman, you have boobs of different sizes. Like you start where everybody starts with like a balloon. And then it's like, but the ones that I had to craft were out of like plastic grocery bags filled with bird seed with like a knot at the top. Like I had to craft mine.
Okay.
But like, thankfully, no, the trans people that are coming up now don't have to deal with like the same struggles, and it's very nice. And they wouldn't have to like have that same narrative anymore. People can meet, be who they are supposed to be from the beginning at a very young age, and that's like very fortunate, and it makes me very happy. But it is definitely a different set of it. I sometimes struggle to see like what we have in common with our struggles in the same way. But I'm happy for trans youth to be able to come out way earlier now.
That yeah, well, that's interesting because I'm curious. Then, do you feel that as a society we're going in the right direction? Because I mean, everything you just said is awesome, but then you also look at some of the laws that are passing in places like Florida, and I think it's frightening what's going on. So kind of what's your take on all that?
I think that we have more media outlets than we ever had before. I think that we have, we'll read a lot of news that doesn't represent these small areas, but the lawmakers will respond to what they think a larger narrative in their party is, and then enact these laws that are fucking awful and built on lies of like these places trying to get clicks or sharing all this misinformation. And I think that that can be an issue. But when I'm out touring the country, I don't see the same kind of hatred that that these laws and these like leaders and these like rallies or groups or whatever are trying to like instill fear. So it doesn't, I don't think it largely represents like the communities they say they're representing. I, I, I mean, I never thought we'd have gay marriage, but we've been slowly moving towards that. And I think we're just slowly coming up. It's just that, especially, I think that it's intrinsically linked to us dealing with the idea of how we address the patriarchy, and that's like baked into all of the issues about trans stuff. But I do think we're heading towards better places. I've joked recently that we're better off we're safer when you don't know we exist, though.
So let's talk about your other thing that I want to say you've been doing longer than you've been doing comedy, but correct me if I'm wrong, and that's DJing.
Yeah, I've been DJing for 22 years now. And it's really fun. I'm starting to I've been teaching for about the last 12 years, and I keep up with it and have become like try to be, as I've started teaching, I've tried to be a better advocate for teaching dance music history and really how it evolves. And so I've been, I've seen that as my cause to take up and talk about at length with people whenever possible. And trying to talk to people about dance music is harder than talking about trans issues. Just because it's such a funny, memeable thing, since it's a youth culture that is constantly evolving and shifting in such weird small ways. And yeah, I think being an old raver and I don't know, trying to, now that people who are old ravers have families now, it really has changed the narrative of how we see dance music as a youth culture, or is it just old people shit?
Well, so how did you get into that? What was it? Did you just start going to raves, or was it just the art of DJing that drew you in first?
I was listening to an outdated format called Amiga Modules, which is a computer composing tool from 1991, 92, not even older than that. I would say 89, 90. And people could, it was basically a file that had a bunch of samples, and the samples would be triggered by, let's say, notation or sheet music. It would know where to trigger the samples across it. And it was terrible sounding, but it was really the first time you see that kind of being able to share music in a democratic way, because I was just finding it on these websites that people were just sharing their compositions and their music. And even on a shitty computer, like I had an old Mac Classic, I could still listen to it. And about there is where I started like finding and falling in love with it, really. But I think we're of a generation that can't help but have nostalgia for like video game music or electronic music scores from movies or any number of things in that regard. But
so let's talk about the album. Tell me everything about the album.
I again have been like hitting it and coming back hard for the past like I would say like 10-ish to 13-ish years. I've been like coming back to try to treat it, and especially in the last like 5 years, treating it very like seriously. And I had so much trans material that I couldn't, as a trans comic, you could only do so much trans shit until it turns into a one-person show. And so and I don't have that kind of dramatic arc in me. I think it was more about I think about like having a little bit of trans material in my sets usually, and that, you know, that's my I think that's my revolutionary act, is humanizing the trans narrative, like by just sharing that I'm a boring ass person and that diffuses what people think about trans people. And like I, you know, don't talk about it a whole ton on stage usually, but I put out a EP. I started listening to podcasts and really like being on podcasts that I really love. And one of them was a podcast run by a game named Kyle Clark. And Kyle Clark does a podcast called Everything is Scary with an old friend of ours, Jen Saunderson.
Oh, yeah. Oh, cool.
And so Kyle had like a similar sense of humor to me, and we kind of clicked. And when I did his podcast, we had chatted about his record label. He has a record label called Radland Records, but it's just like a small indie label that puts out a lot of just like small comedians who sometimes go on to be much bigger things, but it's built around the idea of like, fuck it, let's do it. And I had pitched to him instead of doing an album, doing the EP of all my trans material. So we recorded that last year, last August, and it came out on Radland Records in about January, and did pretty well. Number 2 on iTunes.
Nice.
But I think anything being number 2 on iTunes, you don't feel like, especially if you see that it feels good to be at the top of that chart, but then you're seeing that like Weird Al Yankovic's songs from Fart Song from like 1997 is still popular and on that chart. You don't feel like you're competing as well when you're amongst like the Hanukkah song, and then, you know, a one track of like about if you're a redneck or not, or it's that's
like, that had to have been like 94, maybe even earlier.
Yeah, I mean they're still up on that chart. Look at that chart, is hilariously backwards. But you do see like but anyway, but Radland Records put out the EP. It did pretty well back in January, and then what happened was that I was already on the radar of a few people at due to the timeline, I guess I was getting ready to record an album for another label in a full length for a record label in Seattle called Den Tapes, which is a tape cassette only DIY label, because of course.
There's still a few of those. There's one in Austin, and then this one in Seattle. I'm actually not familiar, but I know there's still a few of those floating around.
Yeah, and like that person was another comic actually. Her name is Kay Redden, and she runs that label, and it's like respected all over. Like indie people really respect that label because she's doing it just out of love. But I was recording something for her, and last December, and I recorded 2 shows, and they were going to be put out on tape. And then, like while it was in the production process, the EP came out. It had a good reaction, and then the A&R from Kill Rock Stars reached out to me and said, "Well, we missed our chance to work with you once, but we'd like to." Talk about working on something in the future. And I was like, I mean, like, I can't just tell them to wait around for another 2 years, right?
Right.
Like, I can't just be like, well, I'll just hold off. I've got a tape cassette I need to put out. So I talked to the people at the label and at the tape label with Kay, and she was like, oh, of course, go fucking do that. Because, like, an indie label is going to respect of course knows that how big of a deal that is, and apparently isn't the first time it's happened with that label. But suffice to say, I go on to record the album for Kill Rock Stars back in June at Eastburn in Portland, Oregon, and it was just a really good time. And now that it's like starting to come out, I just can go back to the shows that I did for Den Tapes and possibly get another album coming out next year.
Nice. There you go.
But yeah, it was like, I mean, I hadn't recorded anything, so I had like 10 or 12 years worth of material that I hadn't recorded, that I've been doing for forever. And so it is, there's like nothing runs over. There's no copying over. There's no like overlap in terms of it. I mean, obviously because of contracts and stuff, but I'm excited for it.
Well, it's funny. You are one of the people I think of still to this day whenever I hear about Olympia, because correct me if I'm wrong, but back when we were both in Seattle at the same time, your partner lived in Olympia.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was living in Olympia and finishing up he finished up Evergreen, graduating Evergreen, and so I was living in Wallingford, and then that housing fell through, so I had no choice but to move, and I moved down to Olympia for I think like a few years. That would have probably been the time that I really had stepped away from comedy. That was probably why, but but I was still like going to work up at Redmond every day, which is like a hell of a commute. But
yeah, did you have a car at that point, or what were you doing?
No, that's where I started writing Twitter on the bus. I had like a shitty phone, but I could go through Twitter, and so I started keeping up with like I started like browsing Twitter and writing jokes still consistently. I just kept at it, was still DJing down there and still commuting up to Seattle, but I'm going I think it's like full circle. I'm going down to do a release party for the album down in Olympia later next month, and nice. It feels neat and kind of iconic to do like a release party for Kill Rock Stars in Olympia. I'd be
Right.
lying if that wasn't like intentionally nerdy shit.
No, I just think that's incredible. And yeah, when I saw that news, that was something I thought of. Like, oh, I remember, riding on the bus with Andy, going from an open mic, going home, and you talking about going to see your partner in Olympia, and here you are on Kill Rock Stars. It's pretty freaking cool.
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, I also feel special that like there, because I'm a DJ and I've loved music so much for as long as I have. I think it's been it really has means so much more to me to be out on a label like Kill Rock Stars, because like I definitely gotten way too stoned not too recently and like looked at the discography for Kill Rock Stars and being like, the Gossip, Bratmobile, Julie Ruin, and then me. Like if it feels weird, but it also feels kind of rad to be part of like an artist family, and I've definitely like talked to some of the people on the label, other artists, and it's neat to have to feel like that support of a label family as well. And I don't think I'm sure would have had that being out on some comedy label, but I don't know, it means a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to me how a lot of the people that we started out with, it's kind of crazy how many are still in the game and are still doing pretty well. Like it's a very high percentage of people that are still at it and are doing cool things, like releasing records on Kill Rock Stars, or writing for some show, or having some cool podcast or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, like we're in that time that like, I mean, Danielle Radford's doing great work with Cracked and online content. Has a really great podcast called Tights and Fights. Jen Saunderson is doing Everything is Scary, but also is part of a really great series called Filling is Mutual for IFC.
Yeah, that's right.
Solomon Giorgio, I think is doing okay.
I think he's doing all right. Yeah,
I think I haven't heard it from him in a while. I'm sure he's doing okay. I gotta look in on him.
Gotta look and see what he's up to.
He had a really great. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say I really loved that first season of High Fidelity, and I think he was one of the main writers on that.
Yeah,
one of many things he's done. But yeah, I was supposed to try to get dinner with him and Nicole, but unfortunately I couldn't make it. But
he's done so much good stuff, and like listening to podcasts is what kept me in comedy kept me in touch with comedy even when I'd stepped away. And listening to the podcast Put Your Hands Together, which is was a show that Cameron Esposito and River Butcher put on at the UCB Franklin every week. And then they would record the episode and put it out the next week as a podcast. So it was like a really unique way to a really raw and unique way to stay on top of like comedy. It was like a really unique thing. And I'd always wanted to do it. And the night that I got to do it, I still have like the lineup hung up on my wall. Like Solomon was on the show. So to like, I feel like every time by somebody who's seen me when I started and somebody who sees me now, I do a set and then immediately go over and I'm so sorry you had to put up with me when I started. I'm so much better at comedy now, I swear it. And then he, of course,
we all had to put up with each other when we all started.
Yeah. I mean, we all have things that we all have shit we said that nobody needs to repeat.
Oh, absolutely.
It's all open mic shit, but yeah, and then there's just so many people, and I'm still good friends with Derek Sheen. I saw him just this past weekend. He's still a sweetheart. Emmett Montgomery's still around. I run a queer open mic up here in Seattle, and he helped work the door for it last night. And yeah, we've all become, outside of the folks who moved out, all the people who stayed in Seattle were still pretty good friends with. And yeah, just so many great people. Even I think Hari Kondabolu had just left Seattle when we started. I think he moved to New York then, but that's the only other Seattle comic that's released a comedy album on Kill Rock Stars. So I also feel very privileged. But he was living in I think he was already living in New York when that happened. That was a fair deal after the fact, but
yeah, I think so. I think he went out to New York, and then he got, I don't know if it was Kimmel, but he got that TV spot like pretty much right away, like right around the time he moved, and then he would come back through for Seattle for shows, but he was in New York at that point.
Yeah, and I mean, he was one of the people that started Lowball, which was the Ballard show, an open mic that we both did, that Derek Sheet helped run. And
I loved that place so much.
It was a great mic. It was just so fun. And yeah, I really do feel like those times are still very special. I do really think we had like a good class of people, and they all went on to do like way better, done amazing things.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, sometimes I think about that, and then I meet other, like comics that you've just met, on the road or just in LA or wherever else, and we'll talk about like, oh, I started in Tampa and da 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 da, and then I think about that, and I'm like, yeah, I started in Seattle, and it's actually a lot of people are still doing it, like almost everybody. And like doing it at a like a pretty high level, and it's just it's humbling and it's awesome.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely, I think we had a good spaces to like do mics in, and I think it was Ron Reed and Carl Wormhoven, who helped run the Comedy Underground then, were so like running such a good space, and that really did help like foster that community to a certain point. And I still remember getting like the rumblies of stage fright waiting to go up and everything, and bombing so many times. But yeah, it was really special to start the way we did. I think that was like the last like huge era of alt comedy, I think, too.
Well, how do you think it's different now? Like just sort of in Seattle, and then kind of just in general, like for comics starting out now. Is that your cat?
Yeah, there's a cat. I'm sure your cat has always been a fixture. I'm sure you're used to it.
Oh yeah, no, I love it. This is a very cat friendly show. She's actually asleep on the bed, but otherwise she'd be making some noise.
This is our neighbor. This is our not neighbors. Our roommate's cat who comes in, and me and Linus, my partner, have always communicated in different animal noises. Like when we lived in Olympia, we used to make bird noises to each other, where we'd just go "Rashab, Rashab," and then he would respond "Papa, Papa" if he was home. And then we moved into the place in Olympia together, and they had a cat, and the cat noise was "brow," which is just like a really like imagining a cat just coming up inquisitively, like "brow." And so me and Linus have browed at each other for years, brow, 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 and then brow, 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 brow. If there's subtitles, it'd be like, "Hey, are you home? I'm very stressed out and need weed." And it would be like brow, 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 brow. Like I had a hard day too. I smoked all the pre-rolls, but like but this cat is as vocal. And so anytime we start browing at each other, the cat will come down the stairs and start browing back. and it's kind of like a threesome situation. Like you have a roommate who's a swinger who just wants in on the action. But it's really adorable. It's really, I don't know. As I've like grown older, that's definitely the shit that has made me happy, is just like little life bits with my partner and friends and dorky shit that just makes us laugh. There's a couple things on the album I just left in as a meta narrative to staying together with my partner for so long is making each other laugh. And there are definitely jokes on there that are just funny to us, but nobody else.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I know you have cat stickers. Am I right?
I have a T-shirt, like a single pair Meow T-shirt, and then we do the comic, the Lucy and Ron web comic.
Oh yeah, I've seen that. It's adorable.
Thank you. Yeah. So it's I mean, Lucy, she's been with me for 17 years. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
How is she doing?
She's good. I mean, she's for her age, she's still pretty. I mean, she still plays. She's on one medication, which for her age, that's not too bad. And yeah, she's the queen of the castle. I mean, my wife and I love her, and she's the best.
Everything you say or makes it sound like Lucy is your mom. She's doing okay. She's still got good mobility for her age. I mean, her stool's not great, and we keep an eye on it. And
a couple years ago, it wasn't, and I got really, really worried. A couple years ago, there was an issue, and I had I was scared. I was like, she's 15, she's sick.
I mean, and any person that, I mean, both ways you could take that are weird. It's like either you're checking your grandmother's stool in the toilet, or there's a 15-year-old who you have to check their poop just to make sure they're healthy. But well, that's great. And how long have you and your wife been together now?
We got married in 2020. So
how long have you been together though?
We got together in 2017.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we met out in California.
Oh,
yeah.
Look at that. You have memories of places you've been outside.
Exactly. Well, how long have you and Linus been together?
22 years.
Wow. That's congrats. That's fantastic.
Thanks. We got together in high school.
Yeah.
And yeah,
he was the reason you came to the Northwest, right?
Yeah. He I was initially supposed to move out here too, so it wasn't just that, but we've been together for so long, and we got married only like 10 years ago, but it was us doing it kind of as a bit, because we wanted to throw a wedding that was like, because if you're together long enough for a long time and your friends have relationships around you, okay, Kat, sorry, if you've been together long enough and your friends are in long relationships around you, it becomes like a hands on a hot body contest, the way that like a radio station contest has you keep your hand on a car, and if you stay on it the longest, you win it. It's like that, but with staying together with our relationship. And we feel like we won the car, but when we got married at a Denny's in Baltimore, the Denny's we hung out in. And
that's awesome.
We did promises of stuff we'd start doing and stop doing once we wrote it as a comedic piece together. We had like Mad Lib wedding vows, and
that's fantastic.
Exchanged onion rings, and
perfect.
his promise was the one that his was the best one. He was like, I promise to curb my high five addiction. And then he says, as soon as I stop being so awesome, and then like high fives like 3 people.
That's awesome. That's fantastic.
But yeah, writing a comedic piece together as as writing this like comedic show together as partners for our wedding was like really fun, and our wedding was really cheap because we did it at a Denny's. But yeah, that's all material that's on the album too. None of what I've said now. I wasn't like trying to shoehorn in material.
No. That's fantastic. So, cats and nostalgia got in the way of that last question, so I will go back to it real quick as we wrap up. So how would you say like the comedy scene has changed in Seattle and just kind of at large? Like, how is it different for somebody starting out today?
From what I can see from the youngest people is that there's, because of the gap that COVID has caused, because of the like gap in time, there's a bunch of newer comics that started at outdoor mics in like places they shouldn't have been doing outdoor mics at all. And so the people they were kind of learning from weren't the best people. And so it's a lot of I think the same is true of a lot of places. You have comedians who have been doing it for 3 years, but the reality is they did like 5 mics over quarantine outside or over Zoom. And but I will say that they know more about being savvy with the younger comics know how to be savvier with social media platforms like TikTok, obviously. I think that's nothing surprising to say. And it's nothing I really needed to get good at and don't really see as a barometer for my success. I mean, I'm like not doing this for a living. I still have a job, but doing what I want to do and getting to travel where I want to and choose the things I do is also a certain amount of freedom. So that's been,
absolutely.
But I think that, so like now, like some mics have like codes of conduct of people not saying shitty things, and that's really good. But I think it's just like people pattern themselves after the generation they grew up watching. And since it is a lot more, people listening to podcasts in the same way or watching, shows on YouTube affecting the way that they see comedy. Or I think as Mark Maron says, their showbiz, because there's so many different kinds of showbiz. And they each want to garner different goals. Like some of them only care to like be big on Kill Tony or something, or some only want to like are only trying comedy in Seattle long enough to move to Austin to try and do that whole Rogan sphere. And
isn't that crazy now? Like that's a thing. It's like people are going to Austin specifically for comedy.
It's weird, and it's also weird because there's already such a rich scene there,
right?
Having gone back there to do a really great comedy festival called the Altercation Comedy Festival, put on
JT's thing,
and getting to go, I've been so lucky to go down there and do it a handful of times, and it is the set that I always want to, that like that represents more the Austin comedy scene. It's like your dirtbaggy left kind of comedy, and it's the set that I care about the most over the year. But having done shows outside of moved and done shows outside of the festival and seeing the like influx of comedians, you can see the effect it's had on the way that people write in that city. So for like a podcaster that big to like move to someplace and shift the taste in comedy of an entire group of people, an entire scene is really wild. It's really wild. But on the flip side, what local comics have told me is that like some of the best comics in all of these other scenes, while we might not agree with them on Rogan, might still be great comics whose material is still really good. So a lot of people in Austin see it as some of the best comics from all these small scenes moving to Austin. And I definitely saw that in some of the comics that were there. I mean, it's like material that isn't my jam, and it wasn't like that was offensive. You could just see the like patterns and beats of somebody saying something terrible and then slowly backing it up in that fashion that like people have glommed onto it in the same way that Burr construction of saying something awful and then walking it back over the course of the joke. But these comedians don't have the time. They don't have a long enough set to do that and don't have the skill. So it's them just saying something very awful, losing the audience, and then it just keeps getting worse over the night.
It goes the opposite way.
Yeah. But I can, like even comics that I really love, there's so many comics that I grew up like listening to, really inspired by, and like going back and listening to them. It's not like they were great. They were still saying terrible things, but with the irony still being put in there. And I think that we don't have ironic racism in the same way. And that is like a step forward. And it makes it clear and when you see like racism now, and like people are like, it's just jokes or whatever. It's more, it has less of the like tact, I guess, but also like in hindsight, we can see the like failings of some of the albums we really grew up loving. But I think they're all time capsules and stuff. And like I really love, Patton Oswalt's Werewolves and Lollipops is the album that got me into really what I wanted my album to sound like, was that. And going back to it, I still holds the fuck up, but you could definitely hear parts of it where you're just like, oh, that hasn't aged perfectly. And I think he would like agree, but like, yeah, I think we still grew up with looking up to great people when we were coming up in Seattle. And I think that like the younger generations are looking up to so many disparate inspirations that can be good and bad. So I think it's like a net whatever, I guess. I don't know. I don't when there was like problems with the scene here in Seattle, when somebody started a safe space mic here in Seattle called the Comedy Nest, like all of these comics took offense, all these dude comics took offense to it and started like lashing out over like fake accounts and all of this back and forth. And when a dude got called, and that doesn't happen now. Like when somebody's like a dude gets called out for something, saying something shitty at a mic, him and all of his friends will leave in solidarity and not come back to the mic, and we'll just start an open mic at some other Asian food restaurant like across town. And I kind of admire you have to admire them just like creating their own space to some extent. I don't know.
So where can people go to learn more about you? What do you got coming up? Plug away.
The album comes out December 8th on Killer Rock Stars. It'll be available anywhere. I'd appreciate if people bought it. I do believe Bandcamp has settled their labor disputes, so that's a good place to get it or pre-order it. And just anywhere you get your multimedia from. There's no video of it. I don't release much video other than occasional clips because I still love the listening to a comedy album back and forth and hearing things like happen over the course of it. But I'm like in Cleveland next week. And then I'll be in like Pittsburgh and Portland and just a bunch of other places, Cleveland, all over the next couple months.
What's your website?
I don't have a website, but you can follow me on social media.
All right.
But follow me on social media at Andy Iwancio on X, Mastodon, Blue Sky, Facebook, Twitter. It's really funny that a guy that hates trans people changed the name of his platform to sound like a non-binary gender, and then expects us to respect. And then is upset that we don't respect the new name.
I refuse. It is Twitter. It is Twitter.
But Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, Threads, all of the things. And then I'm trying to think. I'll be on some other podcasts. Other podcasts coming up, like Goods from the Woods. And just listen to those good podcasts, like Goods from the Woods and This Is Rad and Everything is Scary, our friends' podcasts, and Ron's podcast. Obviously. You talked to Jello Biafra the other week. How was that?
Jello, that was a fun chat. He has a lot to say.
Yeah, you don't say. I'm sure he would put out that whole podcast as a 4 LP, a 4-disc LP, or a split 7-inch with somebody playing guitar underneath it. But yeah, and I'll be down in Olympia, December 22nd to do, or December 23rd to do a release party for the album here in Washington State.
Well, congratulations, Andy. I'm so happy for you, and thank you so much for doing this.
No problem. It's so great to catch up. And I've been stoked at being able to keep track of all the stuff that you've done and all the touring and talk show stuff you've done and how good your comic is.
That was Andy Iwancio. Check her out. Catch her live when she's coming to a city near you, and get her album right from Kill Rockstar. So cool. She's putting out an album with them. Music for the 1000 podcast is provided by Andrew Saxena. Be sure to check out his podcast, the Baywatching Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. I said podcast way too many times in that sentence. Leave us a 5-star review, would you? This is still a very, very new show, and when you leave a 5-star review and write a good review, it really helps us grow. So please do that. It is infinitely appreciated. If you want to support this show on the sustainability end, you can do so over patreon.com/Ron Placone. For a give what you can level, you get all kinds of cool perks, including a 1000 bonus podcast between Andrew and myself. You get to see my films before they're released anywhere else. You get exclusive stand-up clips, and you get all my stuff in one place. So again, patreon.com/Ron Placone, and that's for a give what you can level. Even as much as $1 a month goes a long way. All right, so 12 episodes deep. We're 12 episodes deep. We're approaching our first new year. It's not, the show hasn't been around for a year. It's barely been around for 4 months, but it'll be a new year. You know what I mean. We still got a lot of episodes to go. See you next week. Hey guys, Ron Placone here. Take your own 1000 challenge. No, you don't need to interview 1,000 people, although if you want to do that, go for it. Your 1000 challenge can be whatever you want. Maybe you want to call a friend out of the blue once a week. Maybe you want to read a book every month. Maybe you want to start a different garden every season. I guess that might be dependent on where you live. Look, the point of the challenge is taking on an endeavor that enriches your life in some way, and it can be measured. And then, of course, you do it regularly. That's what 1000 is doing for me and hopefully for you too. The main reason for this podcast and every podcast I've ever done is to build community. So take your own challenge. Then join our Facebook group. It's called 1000 What's Your Challenge? ? That's 1000 What's Your Challenge ? And post about what your 1000 challenge is and the progress you're making. All I ask is that people be encouraging of each other's challenges. This is personal and vulnerable, so be cool. There's enough negativity on social media. We don't need to add to it. For those of you who aren't on Facebook, hopefully in the future we'll be expanding to places like Discord, Reddit, but for now, we're starting on Facebook. And again, that Facebook group is called 1000 What's Your Challenge? See you there.